Welcome everyone to the Atheist and Christian Book Club, a monthly gathering of both Christians and atheists, skeptics, agnostics, who are respectively discussing important books from both perspectives. We have been going now, this is our sixth year. We're in year six now, I think, five or six. I'm the co-host, co-founder of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. My name is James Walker. I am the Christian half of that founding group. My job is president of Watchman Fellowship, which is an apologetics Christian ministry focusing primarily on interfaith evangelism. So we research and do outreach and interaction with other religions, but we're also very interested in atheism, skepticism, thus the club. Our other co-founder is Bill Cluck. Bill Cluck is a former Christian, now atheist. And we just got through last month, well, actually, maybe the last couple of months, talking about his journey and his what do you call it, an existential crisis, Bill, with your faith, and especially last month, that was the focus of our book club, and your faith or lack of faith, whichever it is, and you just got through with some surgery, and you had tell us about that.
Yeah, I had a hip replacement, which I avoided for a year, and hopefully I can get back to pickleball and
So the
play.
lame shall walk. So that's kind of almost
Yeah,
biblical, right?
yeah.
I'm going to introduce in a moment Phil, our guest author, to you, and we're going to be talking about his book in just a moment. Let me see anybody else we need to let in the room. This is Facebook Live is also streaming this as well. And let me do exactly that. Our guest author this month. Usually we do have the author with us in the meeting, and we do this month for sure. Dr. Phil Zuckerman. He's a full professor at Pitzer College in Claremont, California. He teaches some interesting classes. He teaches classical sociological theory, sociology of secularity, uh, secularism, global and local, sociology of religion, and also secularism, skepticism, and irreligion. Now, we have Christian authors, we have quite a few people who teach PhDs in the area of teaching courses on religion, but this is the only time I can remember a course on irreligion. So that's fascinating to me. We're going to be talking about his 2011 book, Faith No More: Why People Reject Religion, published by Oxford University Press. Phil, welcome to the Atheist and Christian Book Club.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, there
Well,
you go.
good to see everybody.
Well, I want to just have a few questions and kind of set the stage a little bit. Fascinating book. We on our podcast, Apologetics Profile, from a Christian perspective, we had a two-part interview where Daniel Ray interviewed Jenna Harmon, and she does kind of the exact opposite of that. She's regularly interviewing on video and making podcasts and a book, basically talking about people's journey from atheism or skepticism, agnosticism, the other direction. So this is insightful for people, your book, very much so for people who wonder why. And a lot sometimes we Christians have a bad reputation, sometimes well earned probably, of ascribing motives and thinking that we can read people's minds. And well, I know why you're no longer a Christian because you just couldn't handle the truth of it or something along those lines. But to actually interview and be able to, I felt like I was sitting right next to you during the interview and hearing firsthand. Um, wow, it's rarely, as you point out in your book, one thing or two things, and it's not it's not a epiphany so much as it is a progress. And one of our other members, book club members, is a former Christian missionary, now atheist. Ken Daniels wrote his book telling the story, and he took us through a similar process of questions becoming doubts and doubts becoming more certain. And so, but anyway, from my being a Christian, it was fascinating to me to be able to hear firsthand why people do it and see the variety of the reasons. And one of the sections I went to right away, the first chapter I read actually was the one on Mormon No More. And you had the story of two Mormons. I'm a former Mormon myself.
Hmm.
And so what I found when I read that section is how much it resonated with reasons I'm not a Mormon. I mean, now we ended up in different places. But yeah, I can identify with that. And maybe it was fleeting or momentary, but I do remember there was a time when I thought, well, if Joseph Smith is not true, then how do I know anything's true?
Hmm.
And now I ended up feeling like there was much more substantive evidence for traditional Christianity and than there is for Mormonism, certainly. So it was sufficient for me, or at least has been so far.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was a great book. We
Thank
also,
you.
on our Atheist and Christian Book Club website, I usually try to put up a video or something for those to supplement the book, or either to, sometimes we have some members that don't get around to being able to finish the book or read the whole book. So if you can watch this hour-long YouTube, you can at least come in and we can talk about the topic. And I got okay, I guess we're recording, hopefully. So yeah, so I went in and got the your YouTube video from Georgetown when you talked about the nuns and the heiress study, a religious
Hmm.
study of um, religious adherence and why and that kind of thing and this rise of the nuns.
Hmm.
So here's what I'm going to ask you the question, but I want all of our other members that are here, if you have a question, if you'll text that you want to ask your question. If you don't want to come on camera and ask, you can just ask either Brady or Daniel to ask it for you. We don't mind doing that as well. And if you can be thinking of your questions for Dr. Zuckerman. And but my question on the nuns. Now this is over a decade ago than you wrote the book. So first part of the question, lots changed since then in religious landscape. If you were going to do an updated edition of the book, do you already have an idea of what chapter or two in mind of what you would like to add to the what you already did?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, James, first, thanks for having me, and thanks for all your kind words and that introduction and that take on my book. Um, that's a really interesting question. I haven't thought about it in a while. I think if I were to do an updated edition, I would want to get outside the United States.
Hmm.
I would just want to hear, it's just religion is so different in different contexts. And how people come to their religion, what their religion means to them, what it means to their families. It's just so different. And I think I would want to interview people in different parts of the world and see the similarities and differences. I
Hmm.
remember, yeah, that's probably what I would be interested in. Trying to think what else. I, yeah, that's what comes to mind at the top of my head.
Well, you document the rise of the new atheism, and the that certainly has played a role, but that's in my opinion kind of changed gears a little bit in more recent years.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that? Is the new atheism plateaued? Is it taking on a new direction?
Good question. Yeah, I would agree with you if by new atheists we mean that batch of best-selling authors that sort of busted out at the same time. I don't really know how that happened. I don't think it was coordinated, but yeah, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Daniel Dennett. There was this spate of just best-selling books, and there really hadn't been anything like it since probably Bertrand Russell's Why I'm Not a Christian, and that's from like I want to say the a long time ago. I mean, if you wanted to read kind of a manifesto, you kind of had to go to that. I
Mhm.
think that's from the 50s. And before that was Freud's Future of an Illusion from 1927. So there really Madeline Murray O'Hair was a big deal in the 60s, but she didn't really write a book, a cover to cover book. You could find articles she wrote and interviews she did, but if you wanted a book, there hadn't been anything in decades. So those new atheists really caused quite a splash. And the fact that they were bestsellers was pretty interesting, probably a reaction to 9/11. But anyway, I would agree with you that, and then there was an explosion of social sort of atheist social movement activity, atheist groups exploding on the internet, meetups, so-called atheist churches started to
Hmm.
be getting the news and whatnot. And I would agree with you that that has died down. I don't think there's that anybody has replaced those new atheists necessarily in terms of profile or there are people out there, Matt Dillahunty and others, but they just don't have the celebritydom. And Richard Dawkins is almost, and he's still around, but he's getting up there and kind of old hat, but he does generate still a lot of, and Sam Harris has moved on to other things. So I would agree with you
Feel
that
like the social media component is still just as strong, vibrant. There's that kind of online community that
I,
I don't know if
yeah,
it brought them out of the closet as much as gave them a place they could gather online. Maybe
yeah,
it was always there, but just not nearly as organized.
I think so. I think so. But to me, the bigger story is to answer your question is like, how do you measure a loss of religion? Now, there's sort of different camps. You might think it's like, well, the more atheists there are, well, that means religion's weakening. But there are a lot of my colleagues, Steve Bruce is big on this in Scotland. They would argue that, if you have a lot of loud and proud atheists, that means religion is still strong in society because it's a reaction. Any atheist that feels the need to declare themselves an atheist and be loud and proud about it is doing so in a dynamic of, opposition to something. Well, when you go to the most secularized democracies on planet Earth, you don't find a bunch of atheists. In fact, they would think you're kind of weird if you're an out and proud atheist. So they would argue that a real weakening of religion is actually more evidenced by indifference. And so, where people just don't care about, when religion's really weak, you don't mount an opposition against it. You just kind of don't think about it. And I have to say, while I agree with you that the out loud and proud atheists kind of boom has died down, the indifference is deafening.
Hmm.
I've never seen anything like it. And just to give you anecdotal evidence, I mean, we have, you know, generalized samples and statistics, but just me personally teaching at this liberal arts college in Southern California, 10 years ago, if I brought up religion or secularism or taught my classes, there was a lot of people who were chomping at the bit and they had a lot to say. Now, when I talk about religion, it's as if I'm talking about the latest, advances in carpentry in relation to dental hygiene. I mean, they don't really care. They don't know why I'm talking about it, and there's this kind of notion they're really quite indifferent. And to me, that's actually a kind of deeper secularization. I mean, it's not ideological, it's not political, but it's just the I mean, I don't know if you're familiar, but I teach sociology classes and we read this famous book called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism by Max Weber. And it talks about the history of Protestantism and Calvinism and these different movements and contrasting them to Catholicism and why was there's this correlation, but where did the Protestant work ethic come from and Calvin's teachings and predestination and I had a student just say like, what? No one ever has believed this, right? Like, why is he talking about this? They didn't really believe this back then, did they? In the 1600s and and it was like they just have this real detachment from religion. So I think that is stronger than ever.
Mm.
But it's not a movement, and it's certainly not it's not. There's no celebrities leading the fight. It's just a kind of disinterest and disengagement from religion.
Well, this brings us back to the nuns a little bit. So the ERIS study, the American Religious Identification Survey, how do you self-identify? And it's the most, for the time, and it may still be the most thorough study ever done in the United States about self-identity of religion. And there's been a bunch of studies afterwards where they drill down on the data. My interest in Mormonism, I followed up on that aspect of the
Mm.
later studies and papers that were written on the ERIS survey. But the nuns were like the big story that came out of that. How many self-identify. Was it like 15%? Let me see if I can. It's in your book. I know 15. Yeah, 15% now claim to be none as their religion, which was up from 8% as recent as 1990. So, but even the 15% number is now pretty dated. So,
Oh,
do
that's
you know
old
what's
news.
happened on that?
That's old. We're at 30% now. We're about
30%.
28, 30% of people saying when asked what is your religion, they say none of the above. So it doesn't mean, there's belief aspects to religion, there's behavior, and there's belonging. So you can identify a certain way that doesn't tell us anything about your beliefs. You can have certain beliefs that doesn't necessarily tell us how you identify. So simply to the question of which of the following religions do you belong to, or do you adhere to, or are you a member of? We're now at around 30%, 28% nationally. If you go under 40, it's at 36%. So of all Americans over 18, it's around 28%. But of Americans under 40, between 18 and 40, it's higher, closer to 36% saying none. That doesn't mean, though, that they're all atheists or agnostics. It
Right,
just
right. I
they
want to
don't
talk about that
identify.
too.
Yeah, they
But
don't
but the
identify
but
with their religion. But
just on those
we
raw
do
numbers, though, it seems like it may be doubling every decade.
I don't think I think it has. I think it's slowing down now. I don't think it's going to keep doubling. I think it will plateau. And I think as things get worse in the world, it'll probably dip down a little bit because I think religion is a comfort for people when times get rough. But I think they will be getting rough, especially with climate change. But no, it's been going up, but I don't think it's just going to keep doubling every 10 years or so. But I mean, yeah, and back in the when the nuns hit 14%, I think in 2001, it was headline news on CNN
Mhm.
and US News and World Report. It was like 14%. Now that's considered nothing. Now we're up almost 28% nationally among the adult in the US, and even higher among those under 40. So it's staggering on that front. Now,
And you did a good
PRR,
job on nuancing that none doesn't why none doesn't mean atheist or even agnostic,
exactly. It
because
doesn't tell
it
us
is an
anything.
imprecise question, really. And
It's just
so,
about affiliation. It's very precise when it
exactly.
comes, like, people get options. What are you? Which of these religions do you identify with? Lutheran, Catholic, Eastern Orthodox. I mean, there's some of them have 30 options, different kinds of Protestants, different kinds of Jews, different kinds of Muslims, and then one just simply says none of the above. So if you're trying to get, how do people self-identify? It's a spot on measure. But if you're trying to get into what their beliefs are or their practices, it doesn't tell us anything. A person could go to church every week, but not want to identify with a religious tradition. A person could say, I'm none of those religions and have a deep, deep faith in God or Jesus or Muhammad or whatever. So you just have to ask different questions. And Eris, I believe, said, okay, of those who said none of the above, now let's go in and say, well, how many of them believe in God, believe in a supernatural force, believe in, no God, or are unsure? And PRRI does it as well. So we can drill down and ask those questions, but you just have to be careful that when I say, or anybody says, oh, 30% of Americans are nuns, that does not mean 30% are atheist and agnostic. But I will just end by saying it works the other way too. If you see a survey that says, well, 60% of Americans identify with this faith tradition, there may be atheists and agnostics in that camp. If you
Hmm.
if you're raised Lutheran and you went to Lutheran Bible camp and everybody in Minnesota is Lutheran, you might just take Lutheran, but you actually may be an atheist in your heart. If someone asks me my religion, do I pick atheist? Do I pick Jew? Do I pick none of the above? I mean, so it works both ways. How many people that are
Right.
weekly church attenders only do so because of their spouse? Maybe deep in their heart, when everybody's praying, they're thinking about something else. But so it works both
Even when
ways.
directly asked the question, "Are you atheist?" It's hard. That's a hard answer for yes or no answer. Because a lot of people they're not 100% sure there's no God, but
Right.
they're 99% sure. So are they atheist?
That's a
Uh,
good one.
So
And
you have
also,
even Richard Dawkins has kind of given up. It's everybody's really an agnostic on some level, probably, unless you know all not have all knowledge, you don't know for sure there's no God.
exactly.
So that, and then also you brought out this, which I know for a year I was regularly attending the weekly fellowship meeting of the Metroplex Atheists. I was invited to that, make some good friends, and this book club came out of that year-long time that I spent with them.
Oh,
And
cool.
so it's they shared this with me, but I've seen it. now that I have more atheist friends, I can experience it. You know, I see how this happens, but a lot of people, you don't want to admit you're atheist because it's considered a pejorative, almost a slur. It has been in our culture, and it still has a lot of negative ramifications to it. So you have the one problem is exactly what do you mean by atheist? How sure do you have to be that there is no God before you can self-identify? Secondly, do I want to
Yeah.
say that and go on record?
Big stigma. And that's also what you find in surveys is if you ask people, are you an atheist? A certain percentage will say yes or no. The next question, or 10 questions down, can be, do you believe in God? And they'll answer yes or no. They don't match up. So people, the percentage of people that says yes, I'm an atheist is always about a third of the people who say I don't believe in God. So if just ask like, do you believe in God? Yes, no, maybe you'll get a certain. But if you're asked to actually label yourself an atheist, it goes way down. And the stigma. Will Gervais, as a social psychologist, he was in Kentucky. I think he's in British Columbia now, and he's devised ways to get people to say if they believe in God or not without having to declare it. It's a hidden it's a technique they use in psychology to try to get people to admit things that are unpopular or you're not supposed to admit to. So you get these sets of questions and it says, of these statements, how many would you say yes to? But you don't have to say exactly which one you're saying yes to. So there might be 10 statements, I like football, I have a dog, I believe in God, I'm a vegetarian, whatever. And then you can just say, like, well, how many of these would you say yes to? And then you can switch out certain ones and see where it stays. And what he finds is, according to him, in the United States, 25% of people do not believe in God when asked that way, in the most kind of
Hmm.
um, confidential and anonymous way. But I don't know if that's been replicated. But so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, do we have anybody with some questions so far?
Not yet, but I bet somebody does.
What about you, Daniel? Got a question?
Well, I've talked to Phil, so
Well, we
I
didn't hear a lot of that conversation, apparently.
yeah, well, we had a delightful chat. It was fun to talk to him and get to know what he did and teach. Where are you teaching again, Phil?
I teach at a small liberal arts college called Pitzer in Southern California, but it's part of a consortium called the Claremont Colleges. So
Yeah.
people sort of west of the Rockies may have heard of Pitzer College. People east of the Rockies usually haven't, but it seems like everybody's heard of the Claremont Colleges.
Yeah, my sister-in-law went to a Claremont
Okay.
um in I want to say Bakersfield area or something. Or I don't know, where is there like a main Claremont campus?
It's five campuses and we're all right next to each other. So out my window, I can see Harvey Mudd, I can see Scripps, I can see Claremont McKenna. I
Yeah,
can't.
Claremont McKenna's where Stacy went. Yeah,
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 that's right here.
yeah.
Mm.
Um, how long have you been? I think I asked you this already, but for the sake of our time tonight, how long have you been teaching these courses?
Well, I started as a sociology professor at the University of Oregon, so that was in 98 or 97. Then I came here and I taught sociology of religion for quite a few years, but I started teaching the secular studies classes, I want to say about 10 years ago, to 15 years ago. No, 15 years ago, because we declared the major in 2011. So I've lost track of time, but at least 15 years.
So in your course, in your professional coursework that you're teaching to students, how do you couple just kind of definitional questions, I guess. What, how are you defining secularity? And then how are we defining? I know you talk comprehensively about religion. I mean, you talk about Mormonism and all kinds of other things. And I know this is a bugger to define, but so how are you defining secularity and how do you define religion basically for your course material?
Yeah, that's the first couple of weeks of any class that I teach. I
Yeah.
mean, that's laying the groundwork, and that's really why we have secular studies, so we can try to pick apart what these terms mean. No one was really being deliberate about it. People have been arguing about how to define religion for years, but how do you define secular, secularism, secularity? What do these things even mean? So let's see if I can do it quickly. when it comes to definitions of anything in society, like how do you define a family? How do you define crime? How do you define a drug? Like there's always a kind of divide between, do you want a really wide definition, which kind of will capture everything, but also will, in the net, there might be a few cans in there that aren't what you're trying to talk about? Or do you want such as an exact, precise definition that you're only going to define what you're talking about, but you'll actually miss a lot on the margins that might still be included. I like the idea of like a fish net. If you want to get all the fish in the bay, if you have a really, really fine, tight net, you're going to get all the fish, but you're also going to get a lot of stuff that's not fish. Whereas if you have a wider net, you're going to get fish and all that, but some will slip through the net. So that's the same thing with religion. And with religion, the big debate is, do you want to define it functionally or substantively? In other words, do you want to define religion by kind of what it does and how it functions in the world? Or do you want to define religion by its substance, something that its essence, something that it is? So I'll give you an example. You could define, if you want to define religion functionally, you could say, oh, well, religion is a system that provides people ultimate meaning in life. It's like, what does it do? Well, that works, but then you're going to have to add Marxism, nationalism, love of sports. I mean, I love the ocean. Like there's a lot of systems, out there that give people ultimate meaning, particularly political movements and national movements, and artistic movements. So you'll capture every religion, but you're going to get a lot in there that isn't religion. If you wanted to define religion substantively, you could say, oh, religion is a system of beliefs predicated on supernatural assumptions. Aha. Now that gets rid of nationalisms and political ideology. Like there has to be something supernatural about it. And others would say, oh, you're emphasizing belief, Phil. We emphasize practice. Like religion's about what you do, rituals, rites, ceremonies. It's not about what you believe. So it gets complicated. So my solution is, and this is not mine alone, but I talk about the 3 B's of religion: belief, behavior, and belonging. And I see all 3 of those as a spectrum, like from 0 to 10, let's say. And so with belief, I say, yeah, to be religious, it has to have a supernatural element. That's where I make the cutoff, but you don't have to. That's just for my analytical purposes. That's, soccer may be providing a lot of people with ultimate meaning, but I don't think they think that their star player was born of a virgin, or that if if their team wins, their soul goes to an afterlife. So to me, there has to be some kind of supernatural belief, either gods, demons, devils, other realms, spirits, nirvana, samsara, whatever. So that's the belief component. But for some reason, some people, it's then the behavior component, which usually relates to the beliefs, but not necessarily. So a lot of Jews practice things, but they don't necessarily believe in it. A lot of Buddhists do rituals, but they don't necessarily believe it. But they sometimes do, but they're in relation to. So you got belief, behavior, and then belonging. Just how do you identify? Yes, I'm Catholic. Yes, I'm Muslim. Yes, I'm Mormon, whatever, regardless of what you do or believe. So on those 3 spectrums, I say, like, let's cut it right in the middle here at 5. I'm going to say people that are, 5 to 10, we'll call them religious if they have a certain degree of supernatural beliefs and they engage in a certain amount of religious behaviors and practices and they identify to a certain degree. And then we'll say everybody that's, 5 to 0 is more on the secular end of the spectrum. So a perfectly secular person might be someone that has no supernatural beliefs whatsoever, does nothing religious in their life. They don't even attend somebody's wedding if it's in a church, and they don't identify. If you ask them who they are, what they are, they'll say 1,000 other things, but they won't mention religion. They'll say, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm a sports fan, I'm a hunter, whatever. But religion. And then a 10 would be someone who only holds supernatural beliefs and only engages in supernatural, religious rituals and behaviors all day long, and only, the prime identity is their religion. And most people are not no one's really 0, 0, 0, no one's 10, 10, 10. But we can use this spectrum to kind of look at things. So that's how I define that at the individual level. So for me, I define religion as institutions, communities, practices, and beliefs that humans construct predicated on belief in something supernatural. And then for me, I talk about secularity as the absence of that, or the lack of that, the state of being non-religious, the absence of supernatural beliefs, the lack of engaging in any kind of religious participation behaviors, and the lack of any self-identification with any religion whatsoever. And that's just secularity. Then we got to define secularism, and I usually talk about 3 versions of that, but I don't want to drone on and on here.
No, that's good. And I remember now thinking the idea that, and again, pardon me for repeating questions that we probably talked about originally, but the idea of the supernatural belief you could argue that you could have a positive supernatural belief as a practicing religious acolyte of some organization. But the secular view isn't isn't an absence of supernatural beliefs. They have supernatural beliefs. They just don't affirm them in a positive sense as you know, a practicing Christian or something like that. So it would you say that within secularism there are supernatural beliefs? They're just not the ones that are affirmed by people who believe that God exists, but there are supernatural beliefs. Would you say that? Yes or no?
No,
Maybe?
but I need clarification. What can you give me an example? Because just from what you're saying, I would say no. But if you can you give me an example?
Sure. Like, let's just take a collegiate institution, institution of higher education. Maybe you would call it apathy, but you're teaching at a secular. I'm assuming a secular. The Claremont is secular, but you are defining things like supernatural. And so I would imagine that you and maybe some of the peers and the staff and the institution itself has a particular set of beliefs within the secular, a particular set of supernatural beliefs within the secular paradigm. Because if you thought God existed, or if you thought there was a God, or if there was some, you know, being out there that transcends our world, you would organize the institution along those lines. But because the general consensus is that there isn't one, which is a supernatural belief, I guess is what I'm getting at. The secular belief is a belief that the supernatural doesn't exist, which to me would be a kind of a supernatural belief, if I'm making any sense there. I hope so.
Well,
you have a belief about the supernatural.
If everything is a supernatural belief, then nothing is a supernatural belief. You can't distinguish between naturalistic worldviews and supernaturalistic worldviews. So this may be semantical, but I still don't understand what you mean by, if someone, to me, all I mean is, do you believe in certain factual assertions about reality based on that you could appeal to the five senses or not? If you can't appeal to the five senses, you can either say, I'm sure that doesn't exist, which is ontologically impossible, or you can just say, I don't know, which is perfectly logical and rational. So I'm saying, if you're saying that somebody says there is a God who exists that is beyond, is impervious to empirical observation. We can't see this God, we can't hear this God, we can't touch this God, we can't feel this God, we can't smell this God, but this God exists outside of time and space, and is a creator deity. Okay, those are supernatural assertions. If I say I lack that belief, what's my supernatural belief then? That's like saying, well, a person who believes in fairies is the same as someone who doesn't believe in fairies, or the person who believes in reincarnation is. And then if you don't, I'm just saying I lack evidence to be convinced of the existence of that thing.
So Phil, I think what he's getting at, how many times have us atheists heard your atheism is a religion? I'm sure you've heard people say that, right?
I'm not saying atheism is a religion.
I know you aren't, but people say it all the time. How would you react to that, Phil, if they say that to you?
So I say, well, what do you mean by religion? If you mean like it provides, me with a sense of identity and purpose, and I care deeply about it, and I have strong opinions, and I even meet other atheists for coffee, sure, it's religion-like. I wear a shirt that says proud atheist, and I buy books by atheists, and I have, yeah, that's me. But if by religion you mean the belief in a God, right, well, that's like saying bald is a hair color, or not collecting stamps as a hobby, or not have, celibacy as a sex position.
What Christians are saying is there's religious overtones to religion. You got your holy books, Dawkins. God,
yeah, I think I'm getting at the issue of secularism is not the lack of a belief, but they do actually have, like, if I asked you specifically what you believe about the Bible, Phil, you wouldn't say, well, I don't have any beliefs about the Bible. You would certainly have a position or two, and I'm sure Claremont would have a position or two on the Bible,
but it wouldn't be supernatural.
But in the sense of even in a secular world, defining supernatural is a supernatural belief. Is what I'm getting.
I don't understand what you mean.
Well, if you're outside of the religious context, and you're saying that there is no supernatural, to me, if I'm a freshman in your course and I hear that term, I'm going to ask you to define it. And you in the secular institution are going to define supernatural. And my question is, from a secular perspective, how do you even do that? And I think that in itself is a supernatural belief when you actually define, this is what I believe the supernatural is or is not.
Okay. I appreciate your words, but I'm having a difficulty understanding them. So that
Okay,
might
all
be
right.
I
I think,
mean,
Daniel,
I
what
don't know
you're
what you're
saying
saying.
is
Like
the
if
belief.
I'm not saying there is no supernatural. I'm saying your supernatural claims, I'm not convinced that there's evidence to back them. So that's different than saying, I know.
No, no, no. I'm not saying whether you think it is or isn't. In a general penumbra of the supernatural, if you're in a secular institution teaching a course on the supernatural, you are you do have to define what the supernatural is. And
I
my
just
my
did.
point, yeah, and my point is that the definition of supernatural is a belief in a kind of supernature, one way or the other, whether you affirm it or disaffirm it, you are defining it. And that in
It's a
itself
belief
is
about the
It's
supernatural,
a,
but it isn't a belief in the supernatural.
that's
right.
right, Ken. I'm not
It is.
saying
It is. You do
right.
have a
Maybe
position
that's a
or a
good way to say
belief
it.
about the topic of supernatural. Yeah.
You have a belief about the supernatural. You don't have a belief in the supernatural.
Right.
Right.
And so I guess, thanks, Ken. That's better worded. My word salad there was from a secular perspective. How do you know you're defining that properly?
You don't.
Oh, okay.
That's the beauty of being secular. Like we're just humans doing the best we can. I mean, and we debate, we discuss, we try to make sense of it, but we don't claim some kind of divine wisdom or knowledge. And someone else can come along and say, here's a better definition. And I can say, oh, that makes sense. That's why, like when that's one of the reasons I enjoy going to a Buddhist place of worship more than say a Christian or Jewish place of worship, because at the Jewish or Christian place of worship, they're making historical claims that I have to accept as true. When I go to the Buddhist monastery here in Pomona, they're making philosophical claims that I can sit with, but they don't rest on it's not historically evidentiary. I don't have to find a witness. I don't have to believe in certain testimonies. It's just philosophical notions that I can ponder. And so when you say to me, well, how do I know my definition of supernatural is the correct one? I don't claim to. Just like, how do you define crime? Like, how do you define a family? Try it. See if you can define a family perfectly. There's no perfect definition of a family. It's a social construct. It's contextual. It's historical. Try and define anything in the social world. I can define physical properties really well. I can define water really well, but I can't define beauty. I can't define what's love, what's a relationship. So yeah, my definitions of supernatural are like, here's what I mean by supernatural. You're free to mean something else, and maybe for our purposes, your definition may be a better one, and I'll use it.
I think
As atheists, we go ahead.
Wittgenstein was the one who said, famously that you can't define a game. What are all the features that a game shares in common? All the games we know about share in common. It's a fool's errand. There are families of resemblances. There's overlaps. There's kind of connections, but there's no one definition or feature that ties them all together. And vegetables too. I mean, vegetables don't have any like evolutionary phylogenetic roots, or it's all just a folk, assemblage of concepts that we throw together. But everybody knows what a vegetable, and we all in our culture, we kind of know intuitively what vegetables are, but there's nothing they share in common.
And you mentioned behaviors. Yes, we go to reason rallies. We go to an atheist book club. We have religious overtones there. But I wanted to ask you, it's very disconcerting to me how atheism is really, not going anywhere. I go to an atheist book club. Everybody's my age, 70 years old, and you always got the weird atheist guy that kills the whole vibe of the group. So what?
Not you, right, Bill?
Just
one of those other guys.
So, Bill, what can atheists do to improve the situation? There's not even all the millionaire like Facebook guy and everything. All these billionaires, you think they would at least donate a building? There's, to my knowledge, no buildings. And you've mentioned the atheist churches aren't going anywhere. What's the problem here, Phil?
That's a big answer. I think the problem is, well, I would say like about seven. Most people who are non-religious have no interest in making that a big part of their world or their identity or their life. They just move on to other things. They practice their law, they play pool, they are in relationships. Like most people that walk away from religion or aren't even raised in religion, it does not become a master status for them. They don't want to find, they don't have a desire to congregate with other non-believers and discuss their non-belief. So it was sort of like, I remember one day my daughter, when she was in high school with a Danish exchange student that was living with us, and they started the first week and they said, well, all the clubs had their tables out, join the Young Democrats, join the Young Republicans, join the Christian club, join this club. And my wife said, oh, why don't you start an atheist club? And the Danish girl who was an atheist said, what? So we can meet once a week at lunch and talk about how we don't believe in God? I mean, to her, it's like there's no there there. So I would argue that most people aren't interested in, that except where you find some defense. We find people want to get together with other atheists in the most religious parts of the country. So if you're living in the Bible Belt, yes, you feel alienated, you feel under attack, people think you have no morals, people think so, you want that solidarity. But if you're living in Berkeley, no one gives a shit. In Denmark, no one cares. And the other thing too is, what would an atheist, I think humanists at least have a kind of positive agenda. Humanists are saying, we believe in these positive aspects of humanity and we want to capitalize on that and we want to use that to solve the world. But just atheists in general, what is it that you're actually affirming? What is it that you're advocating? What is it that you're doing? And how do you, so I think there is, the best building I've ever been to was the Freedom from Religion Foundation in Madison, Wisconsin.
I just saw your thing.
Gorgeous building right there by the Capitol with rooms and libraries and art and statues. It's an amazing mecca. But they have a team of lawyers and they're fighting, church First Amendment cases, and they're trying to defend something. They're trying to stop people from enforcing their religion against the Constitution. But atheist clubs, you're right. It's usually a bunch of older white men. Not always, but that's usually what it is.
But I watched that as a great interview at FFR, Freedom from Religion. But let me ask you, have you ever seen Jesus Camp?
Oh yeah, lots.
Okay. So you understand there's seriously delusional Christians that need help. But like the atheist book club I go to, there's a lady, she goes, I don't care. I just streamed my own little atheist thing. It's like, you have got to go and see that these people need help. Don't you? You see that, don't you?
I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that. Let me see. You are Bill. I think in the absence of good health care, affordable housing, good access to education, good access to elder care, good access to child care, safe communities with low crime rates, in the absence of those things, I wouldn't take Jesus away from people. I think it's sometimes the only thing keeping them able to sleep at night. I've met many,
exactly. Yeah. And here's the thing, most Christians, they just go to church every day, especially these mega churches. They'll go there, say, go with the flow. They can have their little immorality. They can go sleep. They can do whatever they want. Nobody's going to call them out, at least in these mega churches. So it's not really impacting, their lives that much. Do you see what I'm saying? So yeah, I understand that. But the Jesus Camp, those crazy women, influencing children and brainwash, those people need to be educated. And not to mention this Islamic, terrible religion that just totally, degrades women, puts women down.
Doesn't, Bill, come on.
Oh, come on. I mean, I go to a health club and they are fully dressed at the swimming pool. Not to mention just
where is that in the Quran though, Bill?
Okay, how about the 5 prayers? Early in the morning, they have the call to prayer where it disrupts people's sleep, causes people stress. That impacts people's lives, and those people, the Muslims, need to be educated. Don't you think, Phil?
I mean, I'm all for education. I think everybody.
But what I'm saying, it impacts their lives. 5 prayers a day. The Christians don't have that problem. They just go to a Wednesday night Bible study or whatever. But the Muslims, it just consumes their life. And I'm not talking about terrorists. I'm talking about day-to-day, stuff that is not living a flourishing life.
You mean like the kids at my college that are on their Instagram for 5 hours a day?
Yeah.
Exactly. What you're comparing it to, my kids are on TikTok for 5 hours a day. I mean, why is praying 5 times a day somehow this horrible
That's
blight,
the
but being on your social media for 10 hours a day is somehow liberating?
it's
I
the
don't,
5 pillars of Cupertino.
yeah, I'm not so sure praying. I think if we all prayed
I
five
think when
times,
these questions are revolving around, it comes up from time to time in the book club over the years, is should the purpose of a secular society or responsible atheists should they do their best to defeat religion because it has this harmful effect? One of the things came up actually back at the Metroplex Atheist Fellowship meeting was somebody said if they could just take all that church money and instead of wasting it on buildings, if it could go into science and hospitals and stuff
hospitals.
like that. But then the other atheists raised their hand and said, no, if they weren't Christians, they'd just waste it on beer. And,
And sports.
and
That's
so
Remember
funny.
I
that.
don't know which of those is right,
They can be
but the
both.
question
No,
is it a harm in many cases is religion? Of course, I am religious, so but from your perspective, Phil, is religion a harmless or maybe even on some level helpful delusion that even though it's not true, there are some benefits, community and things that come out of it that let them believe that, let it go their way? Or is it actually something that is sinister and harmful? And maybe it's both and because maybe with radical Islam or some aspects of Christian nationalism, you would see it as an evil, but maybe not all religion is evil. How do you come down on that?
yeah, I mean, I personally don't believe in any of the claims of religion that I've ever been exposed to. So it's always a little bit weird to me that other normal, intelligent people do. It's always a little freaked me out. Like, what? How can you believe this? I do think the world would be better if everybody relied on reason and rational problem solving and not faith. I do believe that religion has certain harmful qualities, but and in my maybe in my work, I try to sort of convince I maybe am arguing with religion and hoping people become more secular, but in the person to person, I have no interest in trying to disabuse someone of their faith. I don't think it works. I just as I don't want someone telling me what to believe, I don't believe I should be telling someone else what to believe or not believe. I just don't, it's just not how I'm wired. And again, I guess what I was trying to say earlier was like the life is full of suffering. And I've seen it a lot more than I care to. And I see that the faith helps people in those times. Now, I also feel like doctors help them too, and lawyers help them too. But faith to me, I'm not going to pull someone's crutch out from under them. If it is a crutch, then they need it. And it should work for them. And if people believe, to me, if someone stops believing in their religion, okay. But I don't go out of my way to try and like disabuse people of their religion. Now, for the larger sociological or historical question, do I think religion does more harm or good? I actually think it's kind of 50. It depends what context, where, when. I can think of examples where religion has done tremendous harm. I can think of examples where religion has done tremendous good. For every slaveholder who justified slavery with the Bible, there was a Christian who was against slavery and also used their interpretation of the Bible. It's sort of like, what is atheism? Is it Stalin's version or is it, Du Bois's version or Nelson Mandela's version? What is Islam? Is it this version or that version? So
Hmm.
I think atheists always straw man religion. They never steel man religion. And I think religious people often straw man atheists and they don't steel man us either. So I think it's in our best interest to say, look at the good examples as well as the bad examples. And it's like, I'll tell you, yes, I can critique the sexism and patriarchy in Islam and in Christianity and Judaism. You know how sexist and patriarchal Eastern cultures are? Japan has no history of Islam. Japan has no history of Christianity or Judaism. Very patriarchal societies, very homophobic societies. So these things are part of human culture and human civilization. I don't think we can always blame religion. Sometimes, yes. And depending on who I'm speaking to, if I'm in a group of atheists, maybe I defend religion a little bit more. If I'm within a group of evangelicals, maybe I'm defending atheism and critiquing religion more. So it all depends on who I ask. And I do see correlations. I see negative correlations just so here's my favorite one. Like, where'd it go? Here's my favorite from today. Who was most likely to support Donald Trump in the election yesterday? Christians of all stripes, Protestants, Catholics. Who was the least likely to vote for Donald Trump yesterday? Jews and secular people. So there's a correlation there. You know, if I think Trump is dangerous, then obviously I think Christianity helps bolster him, and I think secularity and non-Christian faiths and non-religious people don't.
The
So
irony
We
is
don't
that
want
Trump is not
we don't
religious.
want the book club going in this direction.
oh, sorry.
No,
But
I'm
the
just
irony
kidding
is,
with you.
the irony is that Trump is not religious. So I mean,
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay, but Phil, 40% of the US population believes the universe is 6,000 years old. That is in
I
these
agree.
homeschoolers that are
Where'd you get the 40%, Bill?
I agree.
whatever, if it's 30, who cares? It should
Well,
never
it
be a
matters 'cause
society
you're
that
making up
believes
numbers.
in a global flood.
I
Do you
agree.
understand what I'm saying?
Okay, this is what I would say to you.
Progress.
This is what I would say. I agree with you that people that don't accept the evidence for evolution, that don't understand science, I think that's a problem. But I have a little theory. My theory is that most people just say these things as part of their culture, their worldview. So I bet you if I got a random sample of Christians in this country and I said to them, I'm going to ask you some questions and you tell me if you believe in it or not. You know, in the Bible, it says the first people created were Adam and Eve. Do you believe that? They'd say yes. And if I said, you know, in the Bible, it says that Jesus was resurrected. Do you believe that? They said yes. And then if I made something up and I said, well, you know, in the book of Ephesians, it says that, you know, 17 horses turned into angels. Do you believe that too? They'd say yes, just because it's part of the I don't think they've investigated all these claims and weighed the evidence and said, well, yes, I believe the earth is 6,000 years old because of this, this, and this. It's just what you're taught in Sunday school. You don't critically think about it and you move on in life. You know, like when James said, hey, he used to be a Mormon and now he's not, but he is a Christian. Just on a purely objective basis, there's more evidence for Mormonism than there is for Jesus's story. Mormonism was at least, you know, in the 1800s. Like at least those witnesses were, you know, only 4 generations ago. If I want to believe in Christianity, I gotta believe in shit from 2,000 years ago. And just by virtue of that, it's a bigger leap of, you know, leap of faith. And obviously I don't believe in either one. And I prefer someone who's a Christian to a Mormon in terms of their theology. I don't know what they're like as a person, but I'm just saying, like, I agree with you. Yes, it would be nice if people understood the scientific method and based their arguments and opinions on evidence. I agree with all of that, but I also don't. I just think we could do better things with our time than trying to disabuse people of their Christian or Jewish or Muslim supernatural beliefs. Like, let's get them health care. Let's make sure that, you know, let's get guns out, you know, off the AK-47s off the streets. I mean, I just think we could just do more with our time. Now,
Okay.
I could be wrong. Maybe if we did disabuse people of those beliefs, society would become better. But I think it's the other way around. I think when we make society better, those fundamentalist beliefs tend to go away. When people have healthcare and they have housing and they're not afraid and they're not living in crime-ridden societies with corrupt dictators, you see religion just go way, way down.
But what if you're in a social situation where the majority of people think that you, by virtue of your lack of belief in their religion, are so far removed from God that you are worthy or deserving of an eternity of torture? And you know, how can that not color the way they see you? If they think that their God that they worship, yeah, if they think that the God that they worship views you as somebody who's deserving of that kind of punishment, then how can that not color the way they perceive you or act or interact with you?
I agree.
So
I would answer that question, Ken, in the direction of I also believe that I'm just as worthy of those things. So
well,
I would say you and I are in
but
the exact same boat. You
I
know,
understand the theology. I grew up in that, so I
right.
understand. But it's still a distinction without a difference. I mean, because you've made the choice, and now you've got the ticket. You're immune from that fate. But you think that I am not immune from it because I haven't taken that step. So That's the bitter pill that I have to live with, because my wife is still Christian. The church, people that a lot of people in my life, family are still Christians, and so that's where I kind of, during the first few years after my deconversion, that was kind of an obsession of mine to try to, push back and prove like here's why I believe what I do, so that I could try to convince them, and so they would no longer view me in the same way. See what I'm saying?
Do you sense that from your Christian friends that there's a sense of that you're rejected or some way looked down as a non-human or
Well,
less
I mean, there
than,
was
or is
some of
it
that.
just
There was
that you know
certain.
the theology and you're thinking you're asking yourself, I wonder what they're thinking about me, or have you actually seen
Some
that
of both. Some of
evidence?
it's projection, like you say, and some of it is actual people that, praying for me and just sad and, and getting into just, like people crying over me. It's like my father cried, he pleads to God, it's like, save him from hell, type thing. So it's heart-wrenching.
Yeah,
I think,
my father cried for me too, Ken, and it hurts, but I didn't see it as him thinking less of me because of that. But I know that that's what he believes, and
Mhm.
it broke his heart, and it affected him too, in the sense that I'm the only son, and there was plans made and things like that. But it was mostly just because he loved me, and it was I took it as a manifestation of that. But I will agree with you; it was very uncomfortable uh, to experience that.
Yeah. I mean, so that's kind of what drove me to I probably would have just let it ride, but that one doctrine is so uh, it puts you across a divide, that you can't surmount. It's
Again, you know
Yeah.
it's
only with
you know
difficulty.
the standard is perfection. It seems like you have a problem with the standard being perfection,
Well, I know the theology. I know all that.
but you have a problem with the standard being perfection. Is that your challenge?
No, I have a problem with the commensurate punishment of punishment that's not commensurate with the crime.
Right, but to somebody who doesn't meet the standard,
Right. Yeah.
you
So
meet the
yeah.
standard or you don't.
So, I mean, I have just the belief that ostensibly good God would set up a world in which the majority of the sentient beings He creates are going to suffer eternally in hell. That belief itself is, it's just a non-starter for me.
I agree.
Well, I wanted to say something to Phil because Phil says that, we shouldn't try to disabuse people from their beliefs. That would pretty much shut down this forum, right? But don't you think, Phil, that there's value in challenging people's beliefs in order to make progress and approximate reality? I mean, we're supposed to be able to improve our knowledge of life and the world. So is there value in that?
Yes, Sam, I love how you worded that, and I I I think I committed my life to it. All I do is sit around and teach and write books and write articles and write op-eds. So you're absolutely correct that I see great value in trying to approach a better, more accurate view of reality and get others to see things that way. And I think there's a lot of progress to be had there, and I think we can't help but do it. It's in our nature. So I would agree with you. I guess what I would say is I'm willing to do that with someone who wants to do that, right? So if you have a forum of Christians and atheists and you want to read books together and you want to discuss, that's awesome. But I'm not going to knock on somebody's door uninvited and say, it's my job to disabuse you of your supernatural beliefs. And I'm not going to go to a hospital and tell a mother whose son was found at the bottom of a pool lacking oxygen and was pulled out of that pool and is now a vegetable at 14 years old and will never improve. I'm not interested in telling that woman that her prayers to Jesus are futile. Um, do I think that any worldview that teaches there's an eternal heaven or eternal hell is deeply, deeply problematic? Yes. I think anybody who honestly believes in a hell is morally and ethically impaired. I feel sorry for them, actually. And my in laws, who I am sure think I'm going to hell, I feel sorry for them. I don't think there's love in their heart. I think there's fear and sadness and pain in their heart. And I think any religion that says we are born sinners and someone had to be killed and their blood has to, Islam that says, in this hell, you're going to be burned with burning oil, and then your skin's going to be regrown, and then you're going to get it burned off again for eternity. Like any religion, you name it, that believes in any kind of hell or heaven, to me is fundamentally depraved. But I don't think I can explain that. If someone believes it, there's nothing I can say that will, I don't think, that would get them to not believe it. It's like you can't argue with if someone holds a belief that's irrational, they hold it on faith. How am I supposed to, what am I, what evidence can I bring to say it's not, you either are like Ken, who one day says, I don't, this just does not make sense to me. Okay, then I can read some books to bolster my doubt, to make sense of things. But I just am not, I don't enjoy having those conversations with religious people. It makes me feel sad at the end. Like they feel bad, I feel bad, and it makes me feel a little bit sad for them, and I just feel a bit sad about humanity. Like, you believe there's a God who lets all this suffering happen, and then if you don't love him and worship he had to execute his own son. Why again? Like, none of it makes sense to me. He's himself, and yet he has, if we want, he's going to forgive us if we believe in his son. But if we don't, like, none of it makes sense to me. And when otherwise, one of my colleagues that I respect the most is Mormon, a believing Mormon. He is one of the most decent, kind, loving people I've ever met here in the 30 years I've worked here. Brilliant scholar, wiser than me, smarter than me. But if we get into the Mormon beliefs, it all I do is get depressed. I'm like, how does this guy really believe it? Now, if he says to me, it's just on faith, Phil, then I'm like, oh, you got me. But if you really think this happened, if you really think Joseph Smith, blah, 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 then it's hard for me to square. I don't know how to square that. And so I guess I don't know.
Hey Phil, could you briefly interview yourself? Add your chapter to our book. Where were you? How did you get to where you are? Uh, where where did you come from? Why are you here?
Oh man. Well, I don't know the answers. I'm agnostic on all those big existential questions. But are you just asking for a brief
No, personal
autobiography?
history. Personal
Yeah,
history.
I am all four of my grandparents were Jews from Europe. Two were hardcore atheists and two were sort of just not atheists. I think they were sort of just mildly observant. They went on the high holidays, but were more interested in literature and art and cinema. All four, fled Europe because of the Holocaust. So I think early on in my life, as a child, I was like, oh, Christians kill Jews. That was the kind of narrative I was raised. Not, no one said that to me, but my aunt was at Auschwitz, her brother was at Auschwitz. These are the people that I had Passover with, and they had things stamped in their arms, and that made quite an impression on me. I grew up in a very secular part of the world, Pacific Palisades. It's near Santa Monica. It's near Malibu in Southern California. I was born in 1969. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. I didn't know anybody who was a strong believing Christian, including Hal Lindsey's daughter, who I went to high school with. I didn't even know she was a Christian. I took her on a date. Like, there was nothing about her behavior that set her apart from anybody. I never saw anybody pray at dinner. I went slept at my friends' houses. I never saw anybody pray. These are things I saw in the movies. I thought this was something people did on Little House on the Prairie or
You
back.
need to add that to your bio. Dated Hal Lindsey's daughter. That's it.
Well, one date, and
One
then she
date.
left me. Then she left me for my neighbor. But she was great. But then when I was 15, I had my first girlfriend, Michelle. She was the daughter of a non-denominational evangelical pastor from Kansas who came out to plant a church, which he did. And that was the first time I was like meeting people that were kind, smart, thoughtful, loving, who believed in the story of Jesus and his salvation and all that. And I was like kind of taken aback. I'm like, wait, you really believe this, or is this just symbolic or metaphoric or poetic or philosophical? No, we believe this just as much as we believe that Abraham Lincoln was shot, and that really threw me. And but I'm a third generation non-believer. My parents were non-believers. All four of my grandparents were non-believers. My parents were non-believers. I'm a non-believer. So I was never a believer. I don't know what that's like. And that's part of why I did Faith No More. I wanted to hear from people like, how does that work? How do you believe something so true and then not? Like, is it sort of like one day I'm going to wake up and be like, actually, there isn't a moon? Like, I think I know there's a moon, but how does that journey happen? I'm very culturally Jewish. Not even that. I mean, I celebrate certain holidays. I enjoy celebrating certain Christian holidays with my in-laws. Christmas, I'll go to church with them. Kind of as an anthropologist, not as a believer, obviously, but I was crying last time I went. The music was so
Hmm.
beautiful. The families were so beautiful. They thought they had me, They were like, he's crying, but I was like, it's a beautiful ceremony,
Hmm.
beautiful sentiments and beautiful life. And so my wife likes to meditate at a Buddhist temple. I'll go with her, but I am a non-believer, and I've never believed, and I've always sort of been scared of religion.
So, Phil, if I may challenge you a little bit, have you ever thought about what would convince you otherwise?
Yeah, I get asked that all the time, and I guess it would be I would have to find. To me, Carl Sagan said, like you measure the claim, the evidence is in relation to the claim. So the the more difficult the claim is to believe, the greater the evidence must be. So if you said to me, "Hey Phil, last night I got up to get a cup of coffee in the middle of the night and I saw a dog run by my on my street," I'm not going to really demand much proof of that. It's not a very unusual or outlandish claim. But the minute you say, last night I saw a pink dog run by my window, now I'm going to say, well, wait, was there a circus nearby that he escaped from? Is there like now if you say to me, well, I saw 10 pink dogs and they levitated. They started singing in Persian and then they went up in a spaceship. Now you're asking me what would it take to convince me? I would need so much evidence, not just you, not just your neighbors, not just video evidence. I would need physical evidence. I proportion my belief to the evidence and to how outlandish the claims are. Not even outlandish, unusual. That's what David Hume tried to say. Like, is it more likely or not? Like, have I ever experienced this before? So if you're going to say to me, what would it take for me to believe that 2,000 years ago, a Jewish guy was the prophesied Messiah predicted in books that were written 5,000 years before that? And there's a God upstairs and there's a Jesus below and all that stuff. How would one even, I don't know. I would have to see these things. I would have to touch these things. I would have to have reams of evidence. And if it's, and because it's supernatural.
Right, but what I guess my point is that unless you defined that threshold, then you won't know if you ever met it.
Well,
You
then
could,
give me the claim, and I'll tell you what I would need. So I would need to know if you're asking me like Christianity. There's so many claims I would have to
I
believe.
have,
So
I could give it. I have a claim that fits in with what he was saying there. We could
go
use
for
that
it.
if you want. All right. So in Matthew 16, I'm assuming you teach theology, so I'm assuming you're familiar with what the context may be. If not, just let me know. But Jesus is with his disciples, and Matthew 16:13 says, "Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he was asking his disciples, 'Who do people say that the Son of Man is?' And they said, 'Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, but still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets.' He said to them, 'But who do you say that I am?'"
Right.
So he lets that question sit, and then Simon Peter answers, of course. So I guess that would be the question, Phil. What the Bible claims to say about Jesus, and what does Phil Zuckerman?
Oh, so I would
Who
have
do
to.
you say that Jesus is, and how do
Yeah.
you know?
So
And how do you know?
right. So you just read a story for me, from a story. So I would need to know who wrote that story. I don't know that. So right away it's suspect. Just like if I came to a trial and said, "Well, I have the murder note right here. It says Daniel Ray on this date is going to kill his neighbor's dog. Here it is." The first question would be like, "Well, wait, who wrote that? How do we know they wrote that? What was their evidence?" So you're telling me that a story, it's a great story. I can tell you the same thing in Othello, scene 5, verse 12. Iago says, "Oh, what wisdom is in a man's heart when he's jealous." Like, so if you're telling me like, here's a story, I have to first be convinced I don't know who wrote it. And even if I don't know who wrote it, how am I convinced that it's historically accurate? Aha, I can ask certain questions and I can see, oh my gosh, the person that wrote this didn't know basic geography of the land. That's weird. They don't know the distance from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. They don't know where Tiberias is. Oh my gosh, the person who is quoting Jesus here, those quotes are directly found in the Old Testament. So if that person had the Old Testament on their desk when they were writing that gospel, all they had to do was look at, oh, here's Psalm 14. I'm going to quote that. Oh, here in this prophecy, and I'm going to quote that. Almost everything Jesus does or says in the Gospels is a direct plagiarism from the previously existing sources. So I have many reasons to disbelieve the authenticity of those stories. So until you can prove to me who wrote that gospel and you can prove to me that what they're writing is supported by physical evidence, eyewitness testimony, any way that you would prove a murder, I'm going to say, oh, it's a lovely story, but to me, it was written to convince people of some belief. It's not reliable history. It's not written by an eyewitness to the events, and it's mostly plagiarized from Mark.
But that's my
And now,
question, Phil. What proof?
How would
do
you know that it
require?
would be? I'm sorry, Seb. Go ahead.
And
Sorry.
that's exactly, we come back to the same question. What proof do you require?
I don't have to disprove. You have to prove. You're making the supernatural claim. That's like me saying, okay, Seb, there are 16 invisible llamas hovering over the moon right now, farting pineapples. We can't see them, we can't smell them, we can't taste them, we can touch them, but they're there. What proof would you need to not believe that? I can't
You mean to believe it?
No, you don't believe it.
Okay, I don't believe it. What proof
So
would I?
how could I prove to you that it was true? What would you need?
Right. So I would have to define a threshold, right? So if I have A, B, and C, then I will believe. And that's
And what's
exactly,
A, B, and C for my claim?
I'm sorry.
So here's my claim. There are 16 floating llamas above the moon right now. They're invisible. They're farting pineapples. You can't see them. You can't smell them. You can't touch them. You can't hear them. They don't emit heat, so you can't see them on a heat sensor. What is A, B, and C that would get you to believe my claims?
Well, okay. I mean, under this example, it would be physical evidence.
They're not physically determinable.
So how, okay.
Just like your God. I mean, so this is what I'm saying. When you say to me, like, what's my threshold? I just told you, in order to believe the account in Matthew, I would need to know who wrote it and have evidence of that. I can't just take hearsay. I'd have to have evidence. And just like I would have to have evidence of who, if someone says to me, here, I found this manuscript of Shakespeare's, it's the original manuscript. You want to buy it with me for $1 million? I'm going to say, well, prove to me that this is how do I know this isn't just a forgery? How do I know this isn't fake? How do I know that Shakespeare actually wrote it? Maybe his friend Fred wrote it. Like, it's just weird to me that you're saying, like, what would I require? What would anybody require to believe anything that's outlandish?
Well, what I'm saying is that you're saying I need the evidence, but you've not defined that evidence.
I would need proof that Matthew was an eyewitness to what he claimed to be. And
Right.
I need to proof that the gospel was written by Matthew. I need to have proof who Matthew was. How do you prove anybody from 2,000 years ago? This is what I'm saying. There's no proof. There's no evidence.
So, Phil, are you making the historical claim that your pineapple example is historically that it's an equivalent to the Gospels, historically speaking?
No. So let's use Muhammad claimed to fly from Mecca to Jerusalem on a strange animal. What evidence would you need to believe that?
So the equivalence, though, you're saying that historically the Gospels are on the same level as something like the pineapples, but now you're saying, well, what about the miracles in the Quran?
Right. So you're right.
Okay,
My pineapple claim was not a historical claim. So you're right. That was a bad example.
Okay.
So I'll use Muhammad was sitting on Mount Hira in the year 625, and the angel Gabriel came to him. Do you believe that? And told him that he was a prophet of God. Do you believe that actually occurred?
Well, because I accept the supernatural, I think that there may be something to that vision. Yes. But I think we're talking.
You think there's something to it. Do you think that actually occurred?
No, I don't, because I think the superiority of the Gospels, historically speaking.
What evidence would you need to believe it was true?
What evidence? Okay, so what relevance
would
it be?
It says right there in the Quran. It's written right there. This happened.
Okay, well, I'm glad you brought that up, because here's the point. What you were talking about earlier with Carl Sagan, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, right? That was the principle what you're saying in his book, Science as a Candle in the Dark, the Demon Haunted World. So that's that dragon in the garage. What kind of evidence would you need so that the evidence needs to be in conjunction with the kind of claims that's being made? Right. And oftentimes that's put colloquially into the statement that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Would you say, for our point of our discussion, that it was extraordinary that we landed on the moon in July of 1969?
Yes.
Was it extraordinary that we did it again in 1972 with the sixth Apollo landing?
I don't know enough about that. Sorry.
Well, was it extraordinary that we went to the moon 6 times?
I don't know if we went 6 times, but I do know we went in 1969.
So what I'm
Sorry,
saying is that,
I'm not a astronaut.
Oh, that's
yet.
okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. But it was extraordinary the first time that we went and
Yeah.
landed. Okay. But let's just say, for the argument's sake, that we did land 6 times and there were 12 men that walked on the surface of the moon.
Okay.
Would you believe that I talked to one?
If you could provide me some kind of evidence, sure.
But just face value, would you believe it without me providing anything?
Not necessarily.
Why wouldn't you?
You could be mistaken. You could be saying it just to impress me.
Mhm.
You could maybe be. I've had people lie to me about all kinds of things.
Sure. Is it if it was true, would that be extraordinary that I talked to an astronaut who walked on the moon?
It depends. Did you grow up? Was your father an astronaut? Did you grow up on an aeronautics base? Like, I don't know your life story. Did you grow up in a hut in Borneo? Then yeah, pretty unusual. Did you grow up at a aerospace facility in Texas?
I did not. I had no I had no special connection.
Statistically, it's unusual. Just like I'm good friends with Steve Kerr. That's statistically unusual. And you could
But
demand.
would it be extraordinary if I did, without any connections to NASA,
Well,
that I got an hour and a half with an astronaut who walked on the moon?
It would be statistically interesting. Would it be extraordinary? No, I know lots of famous people.
It's like winning the
Okay.
lottery. It would be extraordinary if I won the lottery.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not
But the
working-
point is, yeah, the point is, from my experiment here, the point is the problem with the extraordinary. So it's very subjective. I could say that it is extraordinary or it isn't extraordinary. And it seems that if I presented evidence to you, say we could have a discussion about the historicity of the Gospels.
Yeah,
If I presented something to you and I would say, this is extraordinary, Phil, you could turn right around and say, well, that's not extraordinary for me. So the extraordinary claims requiring extraordinary evidence doesn't really work in terms of a scientific or historical, because you're just
subjective-
making a subjective judgment, aren't you?
I guess. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I would agree with you that extraordinary is subjective. Like, what's extraordinary to you may not be
Right.
extraordinary to me.
Right.
But I also know that if you're trying to make a claim that is extremely unusual, it's natural for a skeptic to require evidence. That's all I'm saying.
Sure. So the point is the requirements that we're saying. What would be the requirement, and how do we establish what is required versus what is actual? Because the Gospels could be true and your requirements could be preventing you from actually seeing them as being true. Just like whatever I might require for the evidence from Muhammad might be preventing me from seeing the evidence that is really there. So how do we know, how can you verify that the standards that you have in order for you to accept it as true are actually viably applicable to what you're asking?
Yeah, those are good questions. I've never thought about it. How do I know anything? How do I, what I might require as proof is not what you might require as proof.
Right.
How do we determine innocence or guilt in a court of law? I can see a juror saying, well, you're convinced that OJ did it, but I'm not.
Right.
I say, well, but his footprints match the thing. So what? Oh, but his blood was found here. So what? So I'm agreeing with you that there is no kind of we can't. How many billions of people are on planet Earth? I don't think there's some line that we all say. So for me, like, you could read the Gospels and go, bam, I'm convinced. It doesn't convince me. Sorry. And then
by the way, Phil
You're
has a hand up.
Yeah, Phil Bear, I think, had either a comment or a question. Phil,
ahead,
could you
Phil.
want to unmute and
Oh, Phil.
Yeah, I was just I moved on my place on the grid, and so I had to chase my unmute button around a little bit in order to find it. Yeah, I just wanted to, first of all, I wanted to make a suggestion that whenever we have a question, let's use this little hand raise thing. I think it's kind of cool. You can just raise your hand and everybody knows you have a question. But I wanted to expand a little bit on what Daniel was saying, and that is that, and Phil, I applaud you for just saying the word. Oh, you have a. Is he gone?
Sorry, that was an accident.
Oh, okay.
I was just going to say, I love your look, man, and I just love the bald head, the beard. You could be a movie star. So
It's
I just want
amazing.
to. I
And the
mean,
velvet couch.
or
Calvinator, Gilbert.
I love
or I could be the author of the Satanic Bible,
you got it, man. Okay,
because
yes.
that's who everybody tells me that I look like. I look like Anton LaVey,
Okay.
and I won't tell it now because of time, but I do have a story about Anton LaVey and how I look like him,
Okay.
but when Phil, when you said, I've never thought about that your stock went way, way, way up in my book, because sometimes it's a little bit rare for someone to say, boy, I'd never thought about that. You make a good point there. And I think we need more of that. And recently I've had some discussions, and the reason I was late is because I was doing a podcast with Richard Suttles on my channel. And one of the things that I said to Richard was, I'm not infallible. Sometimes I make mistakes, and people bring up points that I just never thought of before. And I appreciate the fact that they've done that. So I appreciate that you said that. And it's especially meaningful for me when an unbeliever says something like that. And so, but I think believers ought to say the same thing with as much frequency as the unbelievers. But Daniel's right when he says that the very concept of extraordinary is completely subjective and arbitrary. And so what I hear you saying is, I can live with that. I'm not convinced because I find it too extraordinary to accept. I don't find the evidence extraordinary enough. So what you're actually raising, the point you're actually raising here, is a distinction that sometimes people really aren't aware of and don't recognize. And that's the distinction between what has been proven and what has been convincing. There's a difference between something that's convincing and something that has enough evidence to establish it as conclusively true. And so when we examine the question of whether or not something has extraordinary evidence because it needs extraordinary evidence because of an extraordinary claim, we need to recognize that what we're talking about is whether or not I'm willing to be convinced by it. I want something more extraordinary, and if I don't get it, I'm not going to be convinced. But that doesn't even touch the issue of, has this phenomenon, has this claim been proven? Has it actually been established as an indisputable fact by the evidence? And those are completely separate questions. And what happens is people will say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and then they will move from there to, therefore, the claims of Christianity have not been established.
Right. I see what you're saying. That's a non sequitur, really.
That's a non sequitur, exactly.
That's
What I was trained to call an irrelevant conclusion. And so that's what I think people need to shift their focus and change their whole paradigm as to what they're willing to be convinced by. Because I had to reach a point in my life where I had to stop saying, I'm not convinced, I'm not willing to be convinced because I don't like the strength of your evidence. I had to make a complete paradigm shift and say, I have to be willing to be convinced by something that is objective instead of something that's subjective. And if that's the case, that's going to revolutionize the entire conversation at that point. And if Christianity is true, and if someone stands before God and says, I wasn't convinced, God's not going to say, oh, well, if you weren't convinced, then that's okay. I'll give you a pass.
Right.
So, Phil, if that's the point I was trying to make earlier, is that unless I define for myself what would be convincing, my own biases and my prejudice will prevent me from ever being convinced.
Right.
Yeah.
and that's called, there's a term for that as well, and the term sounds a little bit nasty, but it's actually not as nasty as it sounds. The term is called invincible ignorance, and it's actually an informal fallacy. If you study logic, that's one of the informal fallacies that you will find in a logic textbook. But to your earlier comment, Phil, that when you said there just isn't any evidence, I think what you should do is reconsider that claim or that notion, because there actually is evidence. And Daniel was saying, yeah, there isn't an equivalence. There's not an equivalence between, this fantasy scenario you were describing and what's claimed in the New Testament. What's claimed in the New Testament is something that happened, so that eyewitnesses could actually observe. And so it's in a separate category from the claim of there's some mystical being out there who's doing certain mystical things and they're invisible, and so we can't observe them, and so the rules of evidence are not going to help us very much.
Yeah, his example of Muhammad, I think, would be a better parallel. His second example.
It would be.
Or Joseph Smith's historical claims.
Yeah, Joseph's.
Right.
And those were in English 170 years ago.
And I would submit that there is a vacuum of evidence in support of Joseph Smith's claim that we don't have in support of the New Testament claims, because in the New Testament we have multiple eyewitnesses, and they're
prove to me they're eyewitnesses.
Well, let me jump in here. So I think Phil.
Let me keep going here, because the claim in the New Testament
that I can't. Just because they say they're eyewitnesses, that proves they're eyewitnesses.
Wait a minute.
But here's what happened. Okay, hold on a second. Here's what happened. What happened in the first century?
Until you convince them.
Okay, hold on. Please let me finish the thought here.
He does not believe in supernatural.
What happened in the New Testament in the first century was that people made certain claims about the resurrection of Christ and other supernatural claims. And then they didn't just make those claims, they wrote those claims down and they started circulating them among the entire Mediterranean world. They made those claims public. They didn't just keep them to themselves. And so when you make claims like that public, there's only one reason why you can do it, because you have the confidence that your claims.
Everything you just said applies to Joseph Smith and every other prophet that's ever.
Actually, it does not apply to Joseph Smith, because Joseph Smith did not have witnesses, and there are not several.
13 witnesses on the golden plates.
They all recanted, and they all said we were not there. So that was a completely.
And what witnesses are you talking about to the New Testament stories? Who are they?
Well, you can identify who the witnesses were.
How?
Because they stated that they were witnesses, eyewitnesses.
So I find a note that says Bill Bear admits to killing somebody.
Let me finish. Let me finish the thought, okay? Because there's more to this. They claimed they were eyewitnesses, and they published that data, and then
you don't know who wrote those. Nobody knows. The original Gospels are not signed by any name.
We go back to what
that's not okay. The point here is not who wrote them. The point is what they wrote, because there is a standard criteria in historiography where you can apply various tests to historical claims and testimony, and you can test those claims based on the content, and you can tell by the content that this was something that was written or that was claimed by an eyewitness, because they give details that only an eyewitness would know, and only an eyewitness. So when they publish those claims and they circulate that data, and they make copies of it, and copies and copies and copies, and they send it all around the world. They send it to as far as they can send it. Then if those claims are not true, then there are going to be people who are going to be able to deny and say, I was there, and the way that person said it happened did not happen. And so if someone knows that their claims are false, and they circulate those claims, then the people who know that those claims are false are going to come out, and they're going to correct them, and they're going to contradict
But why
them.
do we have urban legends that people still believe? I mean, they're contradicted, but people still believe them. But think about E. Jean Carroll, for example. If what you're saying is true, Phil, she came with some very detailed claims about what Trump had done to her back in whatever the 90s or whatever it was, and she's received a lot of death threats. So she's put her name to a claim that has put her in the crosshairs of those who are loyal to a person that she's testifying against.
Well,
so
we have to make sure that we have to make sure that we don't compare apples and oranges here, because those are claims that are made by someone that does not have eyewitnesses to back up those claims. There was not somebody there who could verify and corroborate those things. But here's the other factor that we need to be aware of, and that is that there are legal scholars who know what evidence is. And one of them is a guy by the name of Simon Greenleaf.
Informal fallacy. Can't appeal to authority. Phil, if you're not going to let me,
I'm not appealing
ignorance. I don't care. I'm getting bored here. You're not going to convince me that the Gospels are true. I appreciate the effort, but I'd rather be home eating dinner with my wife. So if we're just going to sit here and you're going to try to convince me that the Gospels are
Phil, but can you tell us why we would not be able to convince you? Could you tell us why?
Yeah, because someone claiming something happened 2,000 years ago. I don't know who they are. The written accounts that I've studied have already been disproven because they don't know basic geography. They get things wrong, like the census thing is wrong. They get there's so many things they get wrong that disprove that they're eyewitnesses. They quote the Old Testament, which proves they were plagiarizing. They quote each other, which proves that they're plagiarizing. So what I'm frustrated by is the question is a real paradox to me. You're saying to me, I don't believe it. I'm sorry. Go for it.
Okay.
And
can I ask you a quick question?
What would I need to believe it? Well, what would I need to believe?
Okay.
Anything. I would need, it's impossible. Any claim.
Okay. So
I'm going to
I appreciate those sentiments, Phil. And so let me ask you a question. How do you know that they got those things wrong in the New Testament? What are you comparing that data to come to the conclusion that they got those things wrong?
It depends on the assertion. I don't spend my time obsessing about this. So if someone says to me, it took me 2 weeks to get from Bethlehem to Jerusalem, I know they don't know what they're talking about, because it doesn't take 2 weeks to get from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. I've been there. So right away, if someone says something about, we know, for example, that the Romans never, ever, ever forced people to go back to their place of birth for a census. But we know that hat was written to square some silly prophecy from the Old Testament. Is he from Nazareth? Is he from Bethlehem? How are we going to make this work? So we know that there's no evidence or records that the Romans made the people that I'm sorry, I'm getting hungry here, but you seem like a smart, kind person. I'd rather not argue this.
Let's go ahead and do this. Let's move on. Let's table that. I would have to say that in my opinion,
and I think
let's go ahead and cut it right here on this. I would have to say that Phil won that argument, though.
Phil,
but I can't tell you which Phil.
Good one.
Yeah. I would rather talk about
I have a quick question to change gears on it, and I do appreciate your time, and I know it's late, and you're getting hungry. So let me ask you this, though. In chapter 10, you talked about some major reasons why people are non-religious, and but one of the ones that was intriguing to me, that was all interesting, but this one especially, secular by nature. So Phil, can you talk about, is there a godless gene? Is it possibly genetics? Tell us about this.
Yeah, I don't know much about genetics, but what I can say is it's very similar to sexuality. So when people are interviewed who are gay, not all of them, but many of them will say, I didn't know about gay people. I wasn't exposed to gay people. Everybody I ever knew in my life was straight. My religion is straight. Every movie I ever saw was straight. Every song on the radio was straight. I felt a Mormon friend of mine told me this. When he was very young and he loved Mormonism, he was a deep, deep, deep devout believer. Something stirred in him when he would get the Sears catalog, in the mail, and he'd see these men in these tidy whitey underwear. He didn't know what that meant. He didn't know he was gay. But most people who are gay and lesbian talk about coming to accept that they were gay, not choosing it. In other words, and they often fought against it. They did everything they could to stifle it, but it was inborn. Now, is there a gay gene? I don't know. But I do know that some people, for example, just are more musically attuned than others. Some people have perfect pitch, some people don't. Some people, we have proclivities that are, I guess, genetic, I guess, hormonal, whether it's our sexuality, whether it's our ability to play musical instruments, even math. I have dyscalculia. I can't do math for shit. Did I choose that? No, I think it's part of my makeup. I have interviewed many people who have said to me, I just felt deep and down, deep in my heart, even though I was pretending to speak in tongues, I didn't really believe it. I did it to make my parents happy. I tried my hardest to believe. So maybe I was using it as a metaphor or an analogy that I think some people, I've also heard there's been some research, for example, that autistic people have difficulty believing in God because their brains don't work that way. They just take things literally at face value. And when you tell them there's this God, it does not compute, right? Certain people with Asperger's are more likely to be atheists than not. So I do think that there are some people who by nature, and I don't know what that even means. Now I don't know anything means, but despite how they are raised, despite what they experience in life, actually deep inside, it never quite made sense to them. At least that's how they say it. That's how they articulate it. And so I kind of look at it like, you find dance in every culture, but some people are really good at dancing and some people just feel really awkward at dancing no matter what. You find art in every culture. For some people, art comes just easily, and for others, it's impossible, it's difficult, it feels unnatural. I think the same thing with religion. You find religious faith in every culture around in all of humanity, but I think in every population, there are some people where it just doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel natural, it doesn't feel comfortable. So that's kind of what I was trying to articulate there. But do I actually think I can point to a gene? No.
So I really liked your book. I found a lot of the stories compelling, and I was identifying with a number of the different experiences that people had. I was wondering how you might pigeonhole me. I grew up in a evangelical family, a missionary kid. Grew up in Africa, born in Africa, then became a missionary myself as an adult. I strongly believed everything that I adhered to growing up, and it was evangelistic. Went back to my 20th year high school reunion, and there was a guy who I had led to the faith in high school, and he came up to me. He says, "Oh, I'm so glad, Ken, to see you. And, I have to tell you, my life has just been turned around, and I'm just I just wouldn't have survived if I hadn't found the Lord, type thing." And I just kind of shrugged and nodded my head because by that time I had left the faith. But for me, as I was leaving the faith, I was almost envious of people for whom belief came naturally. I envied them. It's like they have no problem believing it. It just comes naturally to them. But for me, for whatever reason, and to this day, I don't know what separates me from somebody else who finds it easy to believe. It left me. It left, if I had been that person, 30 years ago, looking in the mirror and thinking that I would be who I am now, I just wouldn't have believed it, that I could become this person, and yet here I am. And so for myself, I struggle to know like what separates me from other people who continue to believe. The majority of people who never, had a crisis of faith. So, anyway, you could ask me any questions you want and try to psychoanalyze me and see like where do I fit in your categories.
Thanks for sharing. I mean, I would say that what you described, I've heard others say. Like most people I interviewed were not, they didn't want to lose their faith. I mean, that's I wasn't interviewing people like, oh, I hated this religion, and the minute I had a chance, I dumped it. It was always the opposite. It was always people saying like, I didn't I loved my religion. I loved my faith. I loved my beliefs. It felt terrible to lose them. So, I think that's common. What is very unusual about your story, Ken, and I don't really know, but generally people are going to find or lose their faith between the ages of 15 and 25. That's kind of the golden window where most, not always, but after 25, it becomes less and less likely that someone will gain or lose their faith. There's something about 15 to 25 where.
Yeah, I was 32.
So that's quite unusual. Every now and then, so I would want to know what happened and how you navigated it. And yeah, I love hearing those stories, but I would need to know more to class.
Well, to be fair, I had a couple crises of faith earlier that I kind of swept under the rug, I think. And
Oh, interesting.
even
That's
before going to
very
the mission
common.
field. Yeah.
That's very common. In fact, there is a doubling down that happens. People have these crises of faith. They'll do all kinds of things to double down and repress that. They'll get even more involved. They'll become even more fervent. It's a pretty
Right.
classic.
But it wasn't sex like some of the ones that you mention in your book. I've had sex with one woman and she's still my wife. So that's the only one I've ever.
Congrats.
So anyway, so it wasn't that. It wasn't, some desire to kind of buck the system. I still have a good relationship with most of my family members, and I go to church with my wife once a month, maybe. So,
Okay.
but I don't, feel as like I'm an integral part of that community. I just do it because she's my wife and I love her. So,
That's a good reason.
That brings up reminds me of another part of your book about this interplay between believing and belonging. And that's what is a religion? Well, part of it is community. And can you become a zero on your scale in faith and still be part of the community? The gay Mormon guy, I forget his name right now, but he talks about he didn't believe it, but when he actually gets excommunicated and he sees the letter from the stake president that his records have been expunged, or however they worded it, it was like he was in no man's land, and it was like he still felt a cultural belonging, even though he lacked the faith element of it. And so there was a study that was done by the Mormon Stories Foundation, John Dehlin, that they did a big survey. It wasn't scientific, very, very stringent scientific, but it was a big sample about why did you start disbelieving Mormonism? What were the factors? They arranged 15 different factors, and they cataloged all this information. But the surprising thing was, how do you self-identify? A good percentage of them still identify themselves as Mormon. They didn't believe any of it. They didn't believe it, but that was their culture. That's how they were raised. And I think that element of your religion diagram of the community aspect of it, the cultural aspect of it, that this is something that even maybe what has motivated these experiments with the secular churches. Here we had the North Texas Church of Free Thought, which is a secular church, but I mean it's like a church, but it does. I think even atheists would see there's some value and community that maybe we don't have as a lot of kind of lone atheists. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think that the belonging part is probably the most beneficial aspect of faith and religion. I mean, the studies show people that are engaged in religious communities, they live longer, their marriages are happier, they have the social capital when things get rough, they have people helping them out when their kids get cancer. Like the community aspect of religion is huge, especially in a country like the United States, where we have such a poor safety net. And I think that's even and the life cycle rituals. I think all of that is super, super needed in the human for most people in their lives. And I would argue that most people don't even know the theology, but they appreciate the communal aspects of their religion. And I do think
any evidence of like atheist groups trying to coalesce around this type of thing. Here we had the thing I went to for a year, which is it's kind of like a prayer meeting without the prayer. But it's community, and it's once a week around a meal. And do you see anything like that going on?
People try, it doesn't work. It's very hard to create community out of nothing. It's very hard to get different strangers to come together and start from scratch, meaningful rituals, meaningful sacraments, meaningful. It's very hard. So yes, humanists try and do it, and humanist groups and skeptics and atheists club. I mean, they try and try and try. That the closest was the Ethical Culture Society, founded by an ex-rabbi in New York in the 1800s, and that managed to actually congregate and create communities around the country. But
What
still,
was the name of that?
the
You remember?
Ethical Culture Society, ethical
Ethical
culture.
Culture Society.
And they managed to have, lectures and sing songs and subscribe to certain ethics and morals. But it's very hard. To me, the ideal is just keep the religious community and just let the theology evaporate. So when I lived in Denmark for 2 years, they have their church ceremonies, but no one believes it anymore. And that I thought was ideal. You got the solemnity, you got the community, you got the comfort, even the pastors don't believe it anymore, but they go through the rituals, they have the coming of age rituals. I like that a lot. A lot of Jews, most Jews that I know still go to synagogue, but not only do they not believe it, they don't even know what they're saying because they don't speak Hebrew. Why would you go and stand in a room for 2 hours reciting Hebrew prayers? You don't even speak Hebrew. It's for the community. It's for the preschool, the elder care, the teen club, the basketball league, the sense of belonging that many of us need. Not all of us, but many of us.
Yeah, Ken made a comment earlier that I asked him if he wanted to share that with the room. You were going to try to do a steel man,
Well,
Ken.
I don't necessarily want to stir up that whole discussion again. I was just going to be put out an olive branch and say an argument or an objection to David Hume's argument is if you had somebody in the tropics and you went down to the tropics and you talked to somebody who'd never seen snow and you try to describe water becoming ice or fluffy white stuff, and they wouldn't have anything to connect with. There's nothing to, there's no common ground there. So they shouldn't believe you if they haven't seen it before. But anyway, I'm just throwing that out as an olive branch to my believing friends. But that's not the main point I wanted to raise. I think the book. I'd rather talk about what's the book. The discussion in the book about sociology. And Phil, I had a question about that percentage of nuns. I think in 2022 it was 31%, and then for the first time in a long time it went down by 3% in 2023 in the latest reading. So it's 28%. Do you think that's a trend? Or do you think that's just a blip? And how do you think the recent elections are going to kind of impact the direction of where we're headed as Americans in that regard?
So the data that I'm familiar with, although I don't know now how I know anything, because I guess how does one believe anything or what is evidence? I'm all screwed up on that now. So I guess I read something from some colleagues that did some studies that indicated that religious faith is passed down through generations. So when you have two parents of the same faith, the chance that their child will be of that same faith is a certain percentage. If you have two parents of two different faiths, that goes down a little bit. But if they're somewhat similar, if you have two parents of completely different faiths, it goes down even more. If you have one parent who's religious and one parent who's secular, it goes down to 50%. And if you have two parents that are non-believers, the likelihood of their child being religious as an adult goes down to about 15%. Or so I've been told. I don't know what kind of evidence it would take to prove to some of your friends in the community. So maybe I'm misreading this evidence or it's all supernatural. Based on that, we would predict that as more and more people lose their faith, they stop socializing their children in that faith. So we would predict generationally that would rise. Now, that's what we've seen in places like Japan, Scotland, Czech Republic, France, Belgium, Scandinavia. Like it's just plummeting generation after generation, generation after generation. The counter trend to that is two. Religious people have more kids than non-religious people, and the most religious of any group have the most kids. So within Jewish communities, the extremist religious people have the most kids. In Christians, the most religious. Among Mormons, on Hindus, Muslims, you name it. So demographically, secular people are going to be outbirthed if birth trends continue. And as the world gets hotter, I think you're going to find more and more people turning to faith because it's a comfort.
And from your perspective, the recent election is going to cause a great revival, whether Trump intended that or not, because of the pain and suffering.
No, I don't know anything anymore. I think Trump may be great. I have no fucking clue. I don't even know how I know Trump is the president anymore. How do we even know that Trump's the president? I mean, it could all be, I don't know what evidence I would require to believe that Trump is actually I don't even know how I know
So,
James.
mark that down. Phil says it was a fake election.
Or I'm just saying, like, I don't even know right now. Like, how can I prove, James, that you exist right now? Maybe this is all, you could be AI. Like, I guess I'm just really strongly reacting to the earlier
I
conversation
promise you, I'd be
about,
much more handsome if I was AI.
well, but that's the trick. You would, if you were handsome, to be a good AI,
Well,
it would make
you know,
have
you
less.
say that, and I'm not trying to open another can of worms or anything, but what I have seen is what you're saying. What I have learned in this book club after 6 years is both sides of us, both atheists and the Christians, we will appeal to evidence and often the same evidence, and we're pointing that is obviously proves our point, and they're
Right.
pointing to the very same evidence. I'm trying to say, well, it proves my point. No, I said it first.
Exactly.
And so it's the biases is what this cognitive bias that we have, we don't realize it. I don't realize it. I can acknowledge some of it. I can be aware of the problem, but the longer I'm in this club, the more I realize that a lot of the conclusions I have that are obvious may have been generated more on my bias. I have to go back and reevaluate these things. So the book club helps me, hopefully, be a better thinker on this kind of thing. Because as long as I'm in the echo chamber at church, all my ideas sound brilliant. Everybody tells me I'm right on everything that I believe, and it's like it works like the social media algorithms. They just take you further and further down that wormhole. So this is my way of saying once a month I'm going to try to climb out of that box that I'm in, and and
Admirable.
and try to see things from somebody else's perspective and stuff. But what Daniel Ray was saying earlier, and this has come up in a more lengthy discussion maybe a year ago in the book club or something, is the moon landing. There is a sizable vocal minority of people that think it never happened because there's no extraordinary evidence for it. And so, well, yeah, we've got video, we've got photographs, we've got not NASA, we've got no, because of their flat Earth bias, there could not have been a moon landing. And so no astronaut could have ever seen the world, So Daniel Ray did get to actually interview one of the moonwalkers, one of the living moonwalkers for one of our podcasts. And he did ask him about these deniers that don't believe that there really is a round moon up there that anybody could have ever landed on. And it's frustrating to me when I try to get on the website and present some evidence. Well, you have this, and like you're saying, none of my evidence is extraordinary enough. And so now I have to take that and back. Am I doing the same thing with Christianity? Are you doing the same thing with atheism? On some level, maybe we are. And so it really means I need to stop and think through, how did I arrive at this? What data do I have to look at? And that's part of what I hope the book club helps me to do personally. I want to really thank you for being here with us today, by the way.
You bet.
I think that more of us then realize that we accept things because the people that we trust believe it. Like, most people can't say why they believe the Earth goes around the sun and not the other way around. They can't give a physical proof of that. They just take it for granted that what they've been told is told by reputable people, and so they accept it. Like, so I had an argument not long ago with somebody about the GDP and how, the direction that it was going, and this was about a year ago. And this person refused to accept the data that was coming out from the government saying that, the GDP had, changed by this amount. So, but how do you have a conversation if you can't even agree on the data? Our society is kind of starting to pull apart because we just don't agree anymore on how we know what's true anymore.
Yeah, there's a whole which I think feeds a little bit on the movement towards secularism. This idea of all the institutions are considered less trustworthy than they used to be. Not just the church, but the media, the traditional news media. I mean, it it tends to put us to where there's no data points that we can actually trust. And I start sounding like a conspiracy theory myself, so it's like frustrating to me, because I want to be able to recognize a bias and understand that comes with the territory. We all have our bias, but I want there to be at least some level of trust that I can have in people being able to quote facts, including the news media, including my church, including Phil's book. When I read your book, I want to be able to trust what I'm reading.
Yeah, I had this was just a couple of weeks ago. I write on Substack, and I had somebody, I had mentioned that I had talked to an Apollo astronaut, and the guy was like, "Was he a good liar? He seems like he convinced you. Does he still seem like he can act well about this?" I mean, his whole thing was, "Well, you can mute me or whatever if you want to," but absolutely, that his whole thing was that Charlie Duke was lying to me, um, and I was duped by him. That it was mildly infuriating, but there was no way I was going to convince that guy, even with all the videos that I have of my interview with the guy, that Charlie Duke and 400,000 other NASA employees were scheming things. I mean, it's just, and so I think
All that was shot in some downstage in Hollywood somewhere, right?
yeah, we can have biases that prevent us from accepting or changing our mind about things. I
Wonder
think.
if I could get a last word in with a joke, because even those of us who leave religion have the stamp, the imprint of the religious tradition that we were brought up in. So a man is walking down the street in Belfast when he's suddenly surrounded by a gang of men. They ask him, "Are you Protestant or Catholic?" The first man, not knowing which answer will let him walk away unharmed, hedges his bets and says, "I'm an atheist." The leader of the gang replies, "But are you a Protestant atheist or a Catholic atheist?" I'm definitely an evangelical agnostic. So
Answer carefully. Well, listen, Phil, thanks so much for
That
giving us part of your life and being a member, hopefully a long time honorary member of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. Strange club. Nobody can understand what we're doing this for. But hopefully you got a little bit of the vision of what we're trying to do tonight. Did you have any final advice for both the atheists in the room and the Christians?
it just I like the how you guys are kind to each other. It's really admirable.
We appreciate you coming on, Phil. Thanks for taking the heat and
You have another
asking.
book in the works right now?
Yeah, I got a couple, but I mum's the word until I sign that contract.
There you go.
All
Well,
right, take
hopefully, if
care.
it's one that would fit the motif of what we do, please let us know when it comes out.
Sounds
Thanks
good.
so much. Oh,
Okay.
real quickly, announcement for everyone else. We're looking for our next guest author. We don't have it confirmed yet, but we are trying to get Dr. Gary Habermas. He's a distinguished research professor of apologetics and philosophy at Liberty University. He earned a PhD from Michigan State University, MA from University of Detroit, also a BRE from William Tyndale College. We want to be looking at his second volume on the resurrection, and it's all about refutation. So he takes and catalogs all the refutations of why the resurrection, explanations of why it really didn't happen, and he tries to deconstruct them, I guess. So I have not read that yet. Daniel Ray has already read the book and already, you've already interviewed him on that book, not yet, right?
Uh, Volume one, I interviewed,
Volume one,
and
you did.
yeah, we interviewed. There's two part podcast on Volume one that's out, came out this fall, I'm going to be reading
Yes.
volume 2, and we're going to interview Gary in January for volume 2.
In January. So that we're hoping to be able to have him for our December book club. So we'll send out an email or put it up on our Atheist Friends of the Atheist and Christian Book Club or our website. Don't forget atheistchristianbookclub.com. And we all not only put the next upcoming book, we always try to have a video alternative. If you don't have time to read the book, you can watch this YouTube and be ready to have a conversation, a discussion when the time comes around. And so we want to thank you for participating. And could we just see a show of hands? How many this is your first time? Would you raise your hand? I didn't remember seeing any new people, but put it in the other.
Has anybody tried to get Steven Pinker on our club?
I don't remember
that's not a bad idea.
trying.
He's got a book called Rationality that's come out not too long ago that I just got through reading. It's really good.
Is he in the UK, Ken, or is he here in the
He's
United
in the
States?
US. He's at Harvard. It might be hard to get.
Yeah.
It's worth a try. We can give it a
Yeah.
shot. What's the book?
Rationality. It's
Rationality.
It's not necessarily a broadside against Christianity. It's kind of more of a
Something we may all
defense
agree
of
on.
rationalism in the Enlightenment and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Something we could find some agreement on, maybe.
Some, maybe
That
not
sounds
all.
boring. Yeah, I'm just kidding. No, who gets to do that? Now, I did read part of what's that name of it? Angels of Our Better Nature.
Better Angels of Our Nature. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, right. And that was interesting. Very, very positive outlook on things are getting better and better. It's kind of like a secular postmodernism. I mean, postmillennialism, not postmodernism.
He's
But,
definitely not postmodernist.
Definitely not
He's
postmodernist.
squarely in the modernist camp.
Yes. Well, let me say thank you again for being here, and we will see you guys next month.